One. I'm very pleased to see Hyepin and Reverend Robin and Reverend Gary. I guess we'll be
Hello there.
heading there. I'm still waiting on a couple of other
Yeah,
panelists.
yeah, yeah. Good to see you. Hey, Rabbi.
Hi, Reverend.
Good to see you. Thank,
Pleasure.
thank you for participating today.
Oh, thanks for the info.
Absolutely.
So I would imagine, okay, here comes Najiba.
Hi.
Everyone.
Hey, Dr. Najima.
I think the only person would be Chaplain Mary.
Hi,
And
Najiba.
we're 4 minutes ahead.
Hi. Rabbi Robin, how are you? Nice to see you. I haven't seen you in person in a while.
It has been. I've been following your work with the commission. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. I'm all over the place these days, so. Rabbi Gary, you look like you jumped out of a 90s hip hop video today. Reverend Gary.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. That was the best era of music, so.
Does it feel to anyone else like the 90s are coming back in a lot of ways?
Yeah, my daughter looks like she stepped out of a 90s hip hop video, actually. She's
Yeah.
16. Yeah. I haven't met all of you, so I just want to say hello. I'm
Yes.
Najib.
Hello.
Yeah.
Nothing like a discussion or a dialogue to get communities together. So this will be a good opportunity to connect in a more
I,
meaningful way. Yeah.
I realize we're being recorded. This won't be placed online, our discussion right now, right?
Absolutely. We're going to talk about how Pastor Williams is coming out of the.
Huh?
That's what happens when you know some people for a long time. Sorry. Okay.
I'm sure we'll be editing it.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, good. I just was
So
like,
you could speak on anything until we officially start, okay?
and I was wondering what's the format for today?
So I believe that Cora had sent the format, but basically
Oh,
there will be a quick intro by Cora, and then I will be doing a short, high-level introduction, and then I will give you guys the opportunity to just introduce yourself in terms of your connection with, work around Stop the Hate, right? And then there will be the additional questions that we sent out. So maybe you might be able to search, or maybe Cora, I don't know, we could resend it out as well so that we
Yeah.
have the heads up. So, but at the end of the day, I think that you have been all recommended because of your ability to, and I guess track record of working across different uh, groups, whether it's faith, ethnicity, public, private, in all those kind of spaces where right now there's just a lot of tension. And so, I think, oh, there is Mary. So, all right. Okay. So at least all our speakers are on board and we're 1 minute ahead. So we're all on the same page as well. But and then we would like to leave room on the back end. So if you can try to keep your answer to like a minute or two, that would, for each of the questions, then I think it will allow us to have some freedom to get some questions, if any, or else I think all of us could go on. We could be our own lecturer for hours, right? As well. Well, it is technically 11:30, Cora, so I don't know if you want to officially start. And I don't know right now if the recording button is on. I don't see it, but oh yes, it is recording.
Yes,
All
it's
right.
recording. And yes, we can get started. And welcome to everybody. On behalf of the LA Sentinel and the Faith and Community Empowerment, we are so pleased to have you participate in our presentation, Stop the Hate and Interfaith Dialogue. We certainly want to welcome our panelists who are so kind as to give their time and input to this very important topic, especially in light of the report that came out yesterday from the LA County Commission, as it gives those alarming numbers on how hate crimes have increased. So, thank you again. And now I will turn it over to our moderator, Hyepin, who is the founder and the president of Faith and Community Empowerment.
Thank you, Cora. Again, my name is Hyepin with Faith and Community Empowerment, and it is really a moment of gratitude that the LA Sentinel, Cora, reached out to say, can we partner? And both of us are the California Stop the Hate partner in their efforts to, again, address hate and violence as well. And I think, as Cora just mentioned, that the LA County Human Relations Commission on Human Relations came out with a report that said that we've had for the past 3 years a double-digit increase in reported hate crimes in LA County. And this past year in 2023, it increased by 45%. And some of the groups that they highlighted that received disproportionate victimization, which includes all of us actually, includes the African American community, transgender, Latinos, Asians, Jewish people, Latinos, LGBT, transgender, and as well as the Middle Eastern. So again, it's just like no one is left out. And so I think that our conversation today is very meaningful, timely, and important. And we're very honored to have each of our speakers who were invited because they, in their own ways, have gone out of their way to really reach across different groups, whether it's by faith, ethnicity, beliefs, whatever, to be able to be peacekeepers, peacemakers. And so again, we're very pleased to have them join us for this conversation. And with that, I'm just going to, again, do a very high level introduction. And then what I would like each one of you guys to do is just take a minute to just share kind of what was your starting point of taking interest in doing these type of work. Because a lot of times people live in silos. And so it's really rare when people do take that courage to, again, cross borders, whatever that means as well. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce each of our speakers. And so I'm going to start with Pastor Bernard Williams, someone that I know because he joined our C2 Leadership Institute and has done some phenomenal work in community service. But let me just say he is the pastor of St. Mark LA United Methodist Church in South LA. He's also serves as a co-chair of CLUE on the board of directors. He served on the General Board of Church and Societies advisory team, has done numerous work on the poor and also ending mass incarceration, as well as he is committed and is passionate about congregational revitalization, spiritual transformation, and community engagement and children and youth mentorship. And so, Pastor Gary, you could share whatever, on the back end, but that's how I share. And then it's my also honor to introduce Rabbi Robin Podolsky, who teaches Jewish thought at Cal State Long Beach and has also served as an affiliated clergy for the Temple Beth Israel of Highland Park and Eagle Rock. And, she strives to live and teach Judaism that is rich with answers and productive questions for people who seek meaning, justice, and kindness in a very complex world. And she has published numerous articles in the Journal of Jewish Ethics, and Plural's Response, and the European Judaism. And then we also have Chaplain Mary Stankovich, and she is a Buddhist teacher, a chaplain, and a social justice advocate with over 30 years of practice and experience. She has taught mindfulness at a number of recovery centers, and she is the director of the Against the Stream for 10 years. And she also serves as the executive director of the Mind Body Awareness. She served as the executive director for the Mind Body Awareness Project from 2016 to 18. And she's also on the board of the Buddhist Insight Network, and also CLU, which stands for Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. And she's also an archaeologist in the Middle East. Very interesting. All right. And then last but not least, we have Professor Dr. Najiba Saeed, who is known as a peacemaker, healer, and scholar. She is the inaugural El Hibri Endowed Chair and Executive Director of Interfaith at Augsburg. That sounds interesting. And she is a professor, expert practitioner, and public speaker for the past 2 decades on conflict resolution, interfaith studies, mediation, education, deliberative democracy, social, gender, and racial equity. And she also formerly worked as chief of staff for council member Nithya Raman as well. And also in 2020, she was associate professor of Muslim and interreligious studies at Chicago Theological Seminary, teaching courses on management, indigenous religious movement, and interfaith leadership. That was quite a mouthful in terms of lots of experience, and again, commitment to peacekeeping. And so with that, I'm going to start again with the same order. Pastor Gary, could you just share what was your starting point of your impetus on stopping hate, stopping violence?
Okay. So first of all, it's an honor to be a part of this group today. And I thank you for the invitation to be here and welcome everybody. I grew up in South Los Angeles, South Central Los Angeles. I came up in the late 60s, early 70s. When I was 13 years old, I was approached by a police, black and white unit, 2 white police. And we were just walking down the street. We wasn't really doing anything. It was right in my neighborhood and right across from the elementary school I had attended. And they told us to get up against the car, don't move. And I had my hands on the car, but I had a scratch on my nose. I did like that. They said, I told you not to move. And they grabbed me and they choked me unconscious. And they left me laying on the ground. They didn't arrest any of us. They just left me laying on the ground unconscious and drove off. And that was an experience that I would never forget. It was not long after that when it was this big deal about the chokehold, and that it was killing folks, and I could have been one of them that died. I grew up in a house where I understood anti-blackness all my life. My parents left the South to come here, and I understand what that looked like. I grew up in a community that was predominantly African American. However, there was a lot of Hispanic brothers and sisters there as well, and we all struggled. And so, from an early age, I think that's been a goal of mine is to fight back and to combat violence and racism, not just for myself but for everybody. That's my starting point.
Thank you so much, and we're glad you're still here.
Me
You're a shining light. With that, Rabbi Podolsky.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, I'm no longer with Cal State Long Beach. I'm now on the faculties of the Academy for Jewish Religion and Hebrew Seminary.
Thank you for the update.
Sure. So I also grew up in Los Angeles. And I grew up in the Pico La Cienega neighborhood. It was mostly white, working class Jewish, and I loved it. And then when I was about to go to middle school, my parents moved us just to the outskirts of Westwood so that I would be in the school district where I could go to um, LA people will know Emerson Junior High and Uni High, which were considered sort of premium schools, and where I would basically meet more bougie people and hopefully make some contacts. And in fact, it was actually a very diverse school. There were two populations bused into the school. One was a group of rich kids from Bel Air who were bused down out of the hills into the school. And the other was a group of mostly Black students who would have gone to Locke or Dorsey who were bused into the school. Where the school was, there was to the south of it, there was a working class Chicano neighborhood. And it was also near the Sawtell neighborhood where there are a lot of Asian Americans. So it was actually a very diverse school. But one couldn't help but notice how segregated socially we are, and in classes as well, that the white students tended to get tracked into advanced placement. The students of color, for the most part, weren't. This is also, now you're going to find out how old I am. I went to high school between 1969 and 1972. So, of course, we were all very active. So I was part of a collective. We were of high school students. We were collective. And we were in solidarity with the Black Student Union. We did things like put out an underground newspaper. We led walkouts. But we also had just conversations, just encounters where we talked with one another about our different lives. This was at a time when the Vietnam War was raging. And I had people say to me, why would I go kill some other brown people when I've got a war to fight here for my own people at home? And so we realized, we were young, we realized, okay, so we can either allow ourselves to be socialized into the racial and other divisions in the dominant culture, or we could work to unlearn the unconscious racism we've been fed. And so that became a project.
Thank you so much. And so, Chaplain Mary, could you just share what was your starting point? And we'd like to keep it about a minute or two.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Hyepin. And I'm so honored to be part of this connection, this getting together this afternoon, this morning to have this important conversation. I grew up in New York City, the same era as Reverend Gary and Rabbi Robin. And it was a very active time. And I saw what was going on. I mean, as I said, growing up in New York City, there were protests, there were marches, there were riots, there were everything. There was violence and there was injustice. And I wasn't too directly impacted by it, but my friends were. And I remember in high school, that was when New York City was just a mess and people were burning down buildings. And I had friends who lived in apartments in the Bronx who formed tenants unions and took over and just took it back and started fighting and saying no to the landlords who were trying to just, burn the building down and get the money. And they just were activists at that time and marching in the streets. And so I was kind of taught early on that we don't have to just sit and take it, that there are things we can do, that when we connect, when we form coalitions, when we find out, when we see what needs to be, the wrongs that need to be righted, we walk and we work in that direction. So thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Professor Najiba.
Thank you so much. And what's funny is all of the panelists were actually friends with one another. I go hiking with Chaplain Mary sometimes in our Buddhist community. Pastor Gary was a student at Claremont School of Theology where I taught. Rabbi Robin and I are friends. I'm just sharing with you that we actually, in real life, show solidarity, whether a church or a mosque or a synagogue or a temple have been attacked. We've all been there for each other. So I just wanted to kind of share that I think that's part of an important story around Los Angeles and how we can choose to be siloed in our own communities, or we can show up for one another. And for me, I grew up on the East Coast, but I migrated to the United States from Kashmir when I was 3 years old with my family, became a naturalized US citizen at the age of 15. So I went through that migration and immigration process and came to Los Angeles because for 1 year, my father lived here when I was in fourth grade and became a fourth grade teacher. He had a PhD, but the only way he could get his green card was to teach fourth grade, because a lot of immigrants, when they come, they are often downgraded in their professional capacity. So he had a PhD and he was teaching fourth graders, but that allowed him to get a green card. And then I loved LA. I fell in love with it as a fourth grader and came back after law school. And I ended up at the Asian Pacific American Dispute Resolution Center. So for me, this report, the release of the hate crime report, was really poignant. I came to LA in 2000 and I graduated from law school that same year. And everyone was telling me in 2021, after 9/11, that I should not interview with my hijab, the practice that some Muslim women, not all, that I would not get a job because we know that there was a huge spike in Islamophobia or anti-Muslim prejudice. I chose to keep my hijab on and interview, and was able to lead the Asian Pacific American Dispute Resolution Center. And I remember within a couple of years, the spike of hate crimes against Muslims was very high. And particularly at one time, Robin Toma asked me to speak at one of the press conferences, and I hadn't shared stories about myself because I was leading an organization. We started, many of us who were South Asian lawyers at the time, we started a crisis response network throughout the county of Los Angeles, because not only did hate crimes against Muslims go up, but because of the Sikh practice, men often will cover their head in a turban. One of the first people who was killed right after 9/11 was actually a Sikh American in Arizona. And for those who may or may not remember, Arab Christians have also been targeted as part of anti-Muslim bias. But in fact, the majority of Arabs in the US are actually Christian. One of the first people to be harmed in the LA County area was actually a Coptic Christian man, if people can remember, right after 9/11. So I wanted to kind of share that the story of anti-Muslim bias impacts not just Muslims, but has impacted other communities. And we also know that 20% of Muslims in the United States, a minimum, are of African descent. So we have about 6 mosques in the Los Angeles area that are predominantly African American. One of them led by one of my former doctoral students, Jihad Safir on Slauson. So those communities experience, as is now the largest growing community in Los Angeles, is the Latino Muslim community. In addition to myself as Asian American, our communities experience anti-Muslim bias, plus anti-Black racism, xenophobia, and all the other kinds of isms that come with being embodied in the multiplicity of the beautiful identities that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. And I actually learned that Indonesia, which I associate as Asian, actually has the largest Muslim population in the world. So again, I think a lot of times we make assumptions about each other, but I think, again, getting to know each other and getting to know the truth, whatever that means, is so important. So thank you for sharing for each of you. I also do want to say that for me, my interest in this space, one was in junior high, I went to an award conference at an African American church, right? And the Black choir, their music, their energy, their passion, their spirituality, it was something that really caught my attention. And so again, whether it's the African American community or so many others that I've come to appreciate, there's beauty that I have yet to discover and has really increased my curiosity of, again, crossing borders, quote unquote. I think also for myself as a Korean American during the LA riots, where our community was depicted in such a negative light and really pit our community against the Black community, when in reality there were so many other stories that are much more. And that also set me on a path to creating bridges of understanding as well. So with that, let me just start and I'll go in reverse order. So Professor Najiba, I know you've already said a few things, but what kind of hate is your community facing and how are you addressing it?
Well,
In
I
about a
think
minute or two. That's a lot to say, but yes.
thank you. I think one of the things when we talk about anti-Muslim bias is we talk about interpersonal anti-Muslim bias and structural, or people often use the term Islamophobia. Many of us have moved away from the term Islamophobia because it seems like it's often interpreted as you can't be critical of the whole religion. And more we talk about anti-Muslim bias because it's not talking about like a critique of Islam as a religion, but it's talking about the discrimination that individuals who are interpreted as being Muslim experience. So you might hear me go back and forth between Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bias. I think so. We have interpersonal and structural. So the interpersonal is when someone comes and says something that is problematic or offensive. But there's structural Islamophobia where the policies or the procedures of an institution, such as an example in working with community colleges through LA County. There, I've talked to young Muslims who are afraid to have names that sound according to them as Muslim because they're afraid of what they might experience in the classroom. That's structural anti-Muslim bias, not interpersonal. I think, like all of our communities, our houses of worship have been targeted. Unfortunately, the mosque that my children grew up in Los Angeles, was targeted for hate speech. Another thing I wanted to point out is for many of us who are immigrants and Muslims, we have transnational identities. So when there's a flare up in another part of the world, that can impact the relationships in Los Angeles. And so, in addition to actual hate speech, hate violence, unfortunately, as well as structural Islamophobia, I think thinking about ways in which Muslims are integrated and not seen as one of the most difficult anti-Muslim biases is Muslims being seen as foreign or not a part of our society, or a recent arrival when we know that Muslims have been in this land before the founding of the United States, because up to 1/3 of people who were enslaved coming from the continent of Africa, 1/3 were Muslim. So we know that there has been Muslim history here for many, many years. And so I just wanted to kind of mention that one of the major biases that we face is that we are a community that is here recently, that we're not a part of the history of this county, of this country, and that causes an outsidership that can be very damaging, especially to our youth who are reporting repeatedly very serious concerns around their mental health. And I wanted to just share that with folks.
Thank you so much. And I would say the Asian American community also experiences that constant, permanent, foreignness. But at the same time, kind of on a reverse order, the African immigrants also, in a way, experience not being included when they're addressing needs in the immigrant community. So again, I think these little nuances are all very relevant to this conversation. So Mary, so Chaplain Mary, could you share, whatever definition your community that you are facing?
I'm a white cisgen straight woman, so on the outside, my experience with hate and is not as out there or dramatic as a lot of our other participants have, because I'm the, except for being female, I'm the predominant, the norm, so to speak, in the country. But as a woman, I'm starting to see, having experienced sexual abuse and sexual violence, there's that. And now there's this opening up of your body, my choice, and how that is coming back into the realm of the world, of the country, and is becoming much more common. And we see all the shutting down of reproductive rights and so on and so forth. So there's that piece of it that's not just for white, but for women across the board, and marginalized communities much more impacted, obviously, than I am. um, as a white person, as a white woman, and in the, talking about the Buddhist side, I'm a convert Buddhist, and so there's a lot of um, hatred in the AAPI community because they're traditionally Buddhist, and they, people go, don't realize that I think the first Buddhist community was established here in this country in the 1820s, 1830s. So it's been around for a really long time, and so it's still seen as foreign, even though it's been here. The Japanese, Chinese communities have been established for decades, over a century. So all of that, this is the intersectionality that we see, the religious biases, the other biases, gender biases. It's everywhere, and so it's easy to be siloed. I could just kind of put my blinders on, but it doesn't work that way because we're not siloed. We're not discrete units. We're walking through this together. And so what impacts you impacts me. Even if I don't see it, it does.
Yes. And again, I would say, again, women's rights ultimately is rights for everyone. We're all connected to someone, whether it's our mother, sister, cousin, whoever it may be, wife. So again, very, very relevant. And I do empathize with also the white community. I've been to the Appalachians, and I realized the stark poverty that's there that I don't even recognize as modern America. And so again, I think, again, all of us need to take time to learn from one another and learn about each other's community. Rabbi Robin.
Well, like Mary, I mean, I'm kind of, I kind of have a double lens because as a pale Jew, we as a community, whether we wanted to or not, have kind of been designated white. It's, Judaism is neither a race nor a single nationality. We're a diaspora here in the United States. We're a diaspora people. We're united by our way of life, and Jews actually include people of every skin color. Around the world, Jews speak multiple vernacular languages, dress differently. We're united by our books and our prayers and our way of life. So, nevertheless, in this country, we have this precarious relationship with whiteness because we've been designated white. The privileges that come with that go against our values. So for us, it's not simply a question of working on our racism. It's a question of undoing systems of oppression, undoing systems of anti-Black racism. And at the same time, we've been the focus of direct hate. I mean, there was the Tree of Life massacre. There was the massacre of Jews at Poway. And for the past year, of course, one of the ways that anti-Semitism manifests itself is a kind of conflation of American Jews with the terrible actions of the Israeli government. Even though people have seen us in the street testifying, saying that we're appalled at this and we want this to stop. And I think that's actually kind of an excuse. I mean, most of the hatred I've encountered lately has been online. And I can see a real difference between people who are appalled at the actions of the Israeli government and people who are using it as an excuse to simply express hatred of Jews anyway. And in my opinion, the African-American sociologist Eric Ward wrote an important paper called Skin of the Game, in which he talked about how anti-Semitism is a constituent part of the way that anti-Black racism is structured in the United States. That the idea is that there's this powerful Jewish conspiracy, the Great Replacement theory, that Jews are seeking to replace white Americans with immigrants whom we sponsor, and it's really racism against Black people. It's saying Black people aren't smart enough to organize on their own behalf. They must be being manipulated by those sneaky Jews. So So and it's kind of endemic to the way that right-wing anti-Semitism works.
Mm.
Um, but of course, online, what one experiences isn't anything that sophisticated. It's just a lot of name calling. And, in that way, it's pretty easy to dismiss. But then when it actually becomes physical violence, there was just recently a synagogue torched in Australia. Um, then it's not so easy to ignore.
Thank you for sharing. And again, I think each of our communities have been victims of these conspiracy theories slash myths that again pit our communities against one another. So thank you for that. Pastor Gary.
Yes. I uh I still I think in my soul, I still have I still feel the pain of slavery. I still hear the cries of my people that were enslaved over 400 years and then coming out of slavery. Uh, uh, Segregation and Jim Crow and redlining and all of those things, just one after another, up to mass incarceration. In the whole 1980s, the whole crack cocaine epidemic that targeted the Black community, and I happened to get caught up in that. And I know a lot of my peers that came through that time were not as fortunate as I am to have been able to come out of it, and was able to not get the lengthy prison sentence that a lot of my people have gotten. This anti-blackness, it's embedded in this system itself. It's an established understanding that I don't, that black people are supposed to be down, and we got people now that's been locked up for 20, 30, 40 years for something that if it would have been a white child, it would have never got that kind of time. And so I struggle with this, and it's just for me, I continue right now. I have a cousin that's kind of famous. Was my wife's cousin, Darren Bell. He wrote the book, The Talk, and he here it is, 2024. We still have to have a conversation with boys, particularly how to handle if they ever get stopped by the police in 2024. We still have to deal with that. There's still a fear of Black people, especially Black men. Just yesterday, I'm walking down the street in Culver City. I was crossing the street. There was an elderly white couple. They were walking and having a good time. But when the lady saw me, she kind of she froze for a second before she kept going. And I felt that.
It's a stop the hate
Yeah.
work.
And and so it's like I live in this every single day, you know, constantly feeling like I'm under attack, or I can't be trusted, or I can be pulled out at any time, singled out because of my skin color. And so that's again, it's just generational, and I'm watching this community in which I work and live in right now being changed right before my very eyes. It's being gentrified.
Mm.
This was a solid African American community for a long time. It's no longer that. People cannot even afford to live in the houses that they grew up in, and so it's just a lot of that, so that's yeah.
That's a big housing challenge also, right? That the country is dealing with, but again, with communities of color because of the history of systemic racism that have excluded minorities from the dream of homeownership. That has really hit many communities and again, ultimately impacts all of us. Thank you, Pastor Gary, for sharing. I also want to just share that for the Asian American community, whose voice often is left out consistently, I think the model minority myth continues to make us look that we're privileged, that we're racist, and that we're weak. And that makes us also easy targets for violence and hate. I know that as a Korean American, Asian American, in the last 2, 3 years, that whenever I walk on the streets of LA in broad daylight, that for the first time in my life that I am super conscious of who is around me. If I'm waiting, I have my back against the wall. I try to stay away from, anything close to the traffic in case I get pushed, because these are just real live accounts that is currently happening. Again, I'm in Koreatown in the business district, and people are being attacked and killed. Literally, several incidents have happened in the last few months. So that is also a reality for our country, for us as an Asian American, and also in that some data that I've seen that's a little old, so I don't know the current data, but Asians are victims of violent crime. We have the highest rate of being victims of violent crime from those outside our community. So I think, again, being seen as privileged, racist, and weak makes us very easy targets. So with that, I know that each of us shared kind of some of the pain points in our own communities, but could each of you just share kind of a aha moment when you were able to see the pain of another community that perhaps at one point you might have had some reservations? And so with that, I'm going to ask first, let's see, I'm going to switch up the order. So, Rabbi Mary, could you share of some community that you may have had reservations, but then through an encounter, friendship, you were able to kind of have that aha moment?
Did you want me or the rabbi?
Oh, did I mix things up? I said Chaplain Mary. Did I say Rabbi Mary?
Okay.
Yes, Chaplain Mary.
Thank you. You can just call me Mary. That's fine.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. I think I was aware of it because growing up in New York and an integrated neighborhood and integrated school, I mean, aware of it. But my aha moment came, and I don't even remember when it was. It's been many, many, many years. And I heard someone say, or I read it, that there is not a single Black person who has not been subjected to racism or prejudice. Not a single one. And it just landed. And it's like, oh, because that they take it, the individual incidents, bad apples, whatever. It's not systemic, it's not a way of life. And that just kind of poof, it's like, oh, yeah, it's there all the time.
Mm.
And for me, it can't be unseen. So having that awareness and then expanding it out to see everyone and being able to connect when people share and saying, okay, yeah, not going, well, that's not true, not gaslighting somebody, but actually opening and going, absolutely. So that I remember as an aha moment.
Thank you for sharing. How about you, Professor Najiba?
Sure. I was thinking about a decade ago, there were a number of Black churches in the South that we weren't sure what the origin of the fires were. And then subsequently, not long after, there was the killing in Charleston, I think, of 9 parishioners. And when the fires started, we had, at that time, I think it was Pastor Kelvin Sauls was the pastor at Holman United Methodist Church. I taught at a United Methodist seminary, Claremont, for about a decade, so became connected with UMC and many other denominations. But it really struck me that, very often thinking of how Christians in this country are in the majority religiously, and often, our holidays follow a Christian calendar, and there is very much more in terms of numbers a Christian majority in the United States. And it struck me, sort of, as I talked about earlier, the intersectionality of Muslims with other identities, or the identities we're interpreted of having as being Muslim or not. It really hit me that in that moment, and that's actually where I met Rabbi Heather Miller, with whom I do a lot of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia work around the country. We met at that gathering, and we have a picture from that gathering. I think a lot of the people who are on this call were there too, but it struck me to think about how you could have a religious identity that's in the majority, and a racial identity that is in the minority, and not just in the minority, but targeted as a community. And so it wasn't that I was, that was, it wasn't that there was, the aha moment was understanding that. And that's a continuous reality. And for all of us to think about, when we show up at the table, people will say, oh, a Christian, Muslim, and a Jew, and a Hindu, and a Buddhist. And I'll ask my
That sounds like the
students,
beginning of a joke. But
like,
continue.
what Muslim, what Christian, what is it? Any of us can have so many different embodiments, and to understand that when we think about where people are coming from, that they could bring 5 different identities to the table, which are beautiful, and I call them superpowers. And some of those may have more of a majority status or a power status, and others may be targets. So that can all be within one person, and thinking about how we interact and show up for one another, understanding and having awareness that there are sources of access to power, and then there are sources of really struggling and dealing with coming into full agency because of barriers that we may face. So that internal contradiction, but for the person who's embodying, it's not a contradiction, it's who they are. So receiving all of that in the conversations and the solidarity that we build with one another.
Thank you so much. Pastor Gary.
So this is something I haven't shared with anyone, I think, except for my wife. It's a moment of shame for me. It became a aha moment. It was right after, I guess it was a few years after 9/11. And I was getting on a plane alone. And there were 2 men dressed in Middle Eastern clothes. And I immediately froze. And then I realized at that very moment that I had actually bought the lie. And I was shamed. And I felt it. And I thought about that the rest of that way on that plane, how I had allowed what I had heard and read and seen on television to affect me in that way, to have fear of somebody else, just because of the way. I don't even know if they were Muslim. And from that point on, I remember that I think that kind of helped for me to just break that whole frame of viewing the world through the media. Because even the progressive media, everybody was on board with that hate. And here I am, a person of color that understands oppression and injustice and being targeted because of the way I look. Here I am doing the same thing to somebody else. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your vulnerability and honesty. I mean, I think we're all guilty of that. And I know that I have also challenged myself or etc. As well. So thank you for that beautiful sharing. Rabbi Robin.
Well, Najiba is reminding me of a moment when I went to rabbinic school. The school that I went to was in a consortium with Bayan, which is a postgraduate Muslim seminary, and also Claremont Institute of Theology. At any rate, we got to mix and match and learn with perspective clergy. And I remember the first time that I walked into the Islamic Center of Southern California, which is also a mosque, and never have I been to such a beautifully cosmopolitan and diverse place of worship ever. It was fantastic. I mean, there were people of every color that is possible for a human to be. There were people who were dressed, some women were in hijab, some were not. Some women were in blue jeans. There was one very obvious lesbian couple who were clearly accepted. There were people who there were Asian people. There were African people. It was extraordinary and united in prayer, and it was a really beautiful thing. And I was a little embarrassed to admit that I was surprised that it just hadn't even occurred to me. And and it was such an amazing place to be. So that years later, when I was in interfaith group of women who would meet together and share from our traditions and make art together. Where do we go on Friday afternoon, the first Friday afternoon after 2016 when Donald Trump won the presidency? We went to the Islamic Center. It's where we had to be. And we went as a kind of honor guard, with signs saying, "Welcome, we're here to protect you,"
Mm.
And then we went and prayed Juma together, and it was extraordinary.
Mm. That is beautiful and extraordinary. And I can relate. Whether it's people or places, I think our tendency is to dismiss. And then when we're so pleasantly surprised, which we shouldn't be, but I think that tends to be a very human nature to go to that default place of dismissing them. So again, thank you for that beautiful sharing. I do want to say a couple things also that after the post Atlanta massacre in which many Asian women were killed at a spa. A lot of leaders from the community reached out, but particularly from the Black faith community, and we had a convening. And I shared about some of the data points that really combated the model minority myth. As one example, Black and Korean homeownership rate is the same, with 7 others that are below Black and Korean homeownership rate. And so I was able to share whether it's on juvenile delinquency, mental health, home ownership, discrimination, etc. And when I asked the leaders when was their first realization that the model minority myth was myth, for literally all of them, they said that moment. And one of the leaders from the Black faith community said, we got to stop hating. We got to start connecting. And I thought, again, I really appreciated their commitment and vulnerability. I think for me, a kind of an aha moment was when I was watching the documentary Just Mercy. And I'm not the documentary, the movie. And I remember the scene where the main character is driving at night and he sees the flash of the police, right? And I think for me as an average person, if I see the flash, I'm thinking, oh crap, I have a ticket. But for me at that moment, as I was watching that movie, I realized for particularly people of color, but especially African American men, that it could be a more of a life or death moment. And so that was one of those kind of aha moments that gave me a greater appreciation for the kind of discrimination that that the African American community could face as well. I'm going to switch it up again. So now that you've shared about where you experienced the pain of another community, could you share a moment of solidarity that you experienced from those outside your community? Again, particularly maybe someone that you would not have expected to be your ally. Okay. With that, should I just pick someone or who wants to volunteer? I'm going to give a volunteer. Okay, Professor Najib.
I'm happy to go. So actually, I was going to share a story from my high school as a Muslim, and then I'll just bring it up to LA. But as a Muslim, I don't drink. So not all Muslims, some Muslims do drink, but in my practice, meaning like it is prescribed, but not everyone always follows. So you may meet a Muslim who does, and that's their practice. In high school, I became best friends with a woman named Brooke, who is Jewish, and she was sober because that was her. She wasn't sober for religious reasons. She was sober because of her practice in dealing with dependency issues. And so we kind of struck up a friendship of solidarity around the fact that we both didn't drink alcohol. And in high school, for me, going to a public high school, there, we would go hiking together. That was what we would do for fun because I wouldn't go to parties. Not only do I not drink, but I don't religiously, I try my best to avoid people who are drinking as well. And so that was I hadn't thought about that till recently, that Paula, and ended up going to her bat mitzvah and just becoming a part of her family, partly because of that prescription around not drinking, which is not a really religious prescription, but for her. So that was one way in which I built solidarity out of my religious practice, but out of that commonality of sobriety. So I don't know if any people remember, but there was a killing at a New Zealand mosque that was very, very, really terrible. And it was an incredible scene at the local masjid, to see the number of Jewish leaders that came to our community. And there's a really beautiful video of Rabbi Sharon Brous speaking, and then I'm crying in the audience, and she's speaking, and I'm crying. And I share that because I think one of the vulnerabilities that we all have is that, unfortunately, houses of worship have been targets, whether it's a Hindu or Buddhist temple trying to get a permit to build. That's been a big challenge in LA County for people who are not aware, as well as for mosques and other communities. So whether you want to build a new religious center, or the violence that we've experienced related to gun violence in our county, has also targeted houses of worship. So I think that moment for me, for someone else, it might have looked like an unlikely situation. But I wanted to share is really briefly, and I'll end with this, is I think it's important that we build relationships in times of peace, so that whether it's a global event that erupts or whether it's a local event of violence, that we really think about how to build relationships. And one of the most profound experiences I had was with mothers in Oakland who have lost children. For those who don't know, I've also spent many years doing gang intervention programs in Southern California and around the country. And we did a Buddhist practice with a religious leader where we sat in silence and had lunch together. And sometimes it's not just doing our own religious practice, but actually engaging in the spiritual practice of and learning from other communities. And that was incredibly moving to me, and something I still carry with me is understanding how to heal through silence. Sometimes you don't have to say anything to someone. You don't have to say, I'm here to help you, but you just show up. And the question I always ask is, how can I show up for you? And sometimes people just want you to be there with them in quiet. So we don't always have to be the center of attention when we're helping. Let's show up and say, how can I show up for you?
Thank you. Thank you. That was very powerful. And I know that even for me, as an Asian American, when we were being hit across, when a lot of different ethnic communities reached out, that was really assuring. And it made me realize that for each of us, our voice, even though our voice to reach out, to be present, right? Not so much that we say words, but that we are present. We have something so powerful in each of one of us, but I think in many ways we kind of minimize that value. And so again, thank you for that powerful sharing. Who's next? Who wants to share? Okay, Rabbi Robin.
Through October 7th of last year, which we all experienced as a terrible blow. I mean, we have a saying, nothing excuses October 7th, and October 7th excuses nothing. So we can be against the behavior of the Israeli government and still horrified at what happened on October 7th. And as it happened, immediately in the days following, the people who were not Jewish, who reached out to me personally, who just called or emailed, happened to be people of color. And coincidence maybe, but I also think it's because they understood. They had experience which made it so they understood.
Thank you. Very, very powerful. Thank you. Thank you. Who's next? Pastor Gary.
Yes. A couple of things. One, when I was the pastor at Faith United Methodist Church on 108th and between Dinker and Western in 2015, that was the summer that was known as 100 Days and 100 Nights of Killing. And the very first person to be killed was a young man. He was a gang member named KP. He was gunned down right around the corner from my church, and I just had been, it's like we have to do more than just preach about this and pray about it. And so we began to, gathered some folk around me. We took to the streets right there in that community, and we started mobilizing community folks and an organizer came alongside of me from LA Voice, and we really began to organize around gun and gang violence. And I had colleagues that came from all over Southern California to be there with me. Asian, whites, people that I was surprised that would come to 108th and Western to stand in solidarity with me as we tried our best to help to end that gun and gang violence in that community. And then the second thing I want to talk about is when after George Floyd was killed and all of those police killings of Black men and women, it was so many people that reached out to me to see how I was feeling. How are you doing? And it was a feeling of solidarity. It was a moment of solidarity, understanding that other people would empathize with me and how I felt. And it really was, it was just just such a beautiful opportunity for me to just understand that there are people that really love and care about each other.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, I think it's a reinforcement of how our voices coming alongside other communities in their moment of hurt, pain, and vulnerability could be so powerful. So thank you, Pastor Gary. Mary.
Yeah, thank you. I can't think of a specific experience, a specific instance. It's just an overall experience of, I've spent a lot of time, I lived in Israel for a year. I've spent a lot of time in Syria. And when I can experience or express vulnerability, when I can actually, because that's not my strong suit, showing vulnerability, that folks are there wherever they're from. As I said, I've lived in many different or I've lived in many different places, and wherever I am, when there's that need, people are there. It's been extraordinary the extent to which people will go out of their way to help, and it can be just the simplest "how you doing?" How you doing? And I find that it's just extraordinary. And so to be able to then see that it works both ways, it doesn't have to be grandiose. I have the idea that something has to be grandiose, but it doesn't. It just has to be human to human contact. And I'm really grateful to have had those experiences, to see that then it just spreads. It can spread from there. So.
You are rich. I also want to share, I could go on and on, but this is related also to the LA Sentinel. Who we honored recently at our reception, but my mentor at First AME Church, Reverend Mark Whitlock, where I worked on their venture capital fund, after the Atlanta massacre, he reached out to say, how can I help? And that led to that conversation about combating the model myth. And we brought Asian faith leaders as well as Black faith leaders to just have that dialogue. And ultimately, Pastor Mark basically said, you know what? I want to write an op-ed. And pretty much he said, let's do it together, Hyepin. But he did the bulk of that lifting. And when he finished, he called to let me know that he was going to title it Asian Lives Matter. And I have to say, there was initially a glee because, Reverend Mark and I, we've had this whole journey where it's been my mentor, but, in the area of Korean Black related to especially LA riots and all that, we had a difference, a gap. And so when he chose to do that, I felt finally as a Korean American seen and heard. But as a friend, I thought, does he really know what he's thinking of doing? And so I did call to do so. And he said, absolutely. And not only did he choose to write that op-ed, but called the LA Sentinel to have it published. And I also want to give a lot of credit to LA Sentinel for choosing to keep that title, Asian Lives Matter and the Black Church, which again, I think because of its sensitivity, that the publication could have chosen to kind of tweak it as well. And so again, I have to say some of my strongest allies and supporters have come from those outside my own community, and for which I feel very motivated to stay in this space to again build bridges like each one of you. So I guess the question that I want to ask is, can you cite an action you have done to help build solidarity or stopping the hate, or something that you're committing to do for the future? So like one thing, one thing, and keeping it short. And for many of you, if you have a question or a comment, please put it in the chat room so then we could call upon you as well.
So I think for me, one of the pieces that has been really important is what we call religious literacy, because we're talking mostly with faith leaders today. And in the research around anti-Muslim bias or other forms of biases, it's not just hate, but it's fear. So some people are motivated to act out of hate, where they have a targeted hate against someone, and others act out of fear. And so one of the things that I think is so important in our work is getting accurate information about each other's spiritual and religious practices from someone who is from that community. And so I'm really committed to the work that we did today is to speak from our own religious practices and histories, and also to understand the diversity within one religion and one community, that within the Muslim community, we're vastly diverse. We are racially and ethnically diverse, but we're also religiously diverse in our practice and manifestation of Islam. So I wanted to share that because I think a lot of times we focus on the hate, and I wanted to add to that the conversation of fear. And the second thing that I've been asking people to do quietly and my students to do is to sit with ourselves. And I think Pastor Gary really gave such a great example. This isn't work we always have to do in front of each other, but to ask ourselves and be really honest. What do I fear? Whom do I fear? And why do I have that fear? And how do I overcome it? And I just wanted to mention that because sometimes we want to do this work together in the same room, but that's work we have to do on our own, and work that we really have to think about, because ultimately, it's not what we say about each other when we're together. It's what we say about each other when the other person is not in the room. What is my mosque teaching about Jews, Christians, atheists? I wanted to mention atheists after, if you're running for office in the United States and you're Mormon or you're Muslim or you're atheist, you are going to be very targeted. Unfortunately, those are 3 belief systems. So I wanted to mention that too, that we don't want to leave out people that are not religious. In fact, they also get targeted for not having a religious identity. So I just wanted to kind of have us think about, what do we do on our own, and what do we say about the other when they're not in the room? Because what we teach our children, particularly, it's the last thing I'll say, you are formed to be a racist or an anti-racist or accepting of all people from the age of 0 to 5. So what are we teaching our children about others? And are we exposing them to others as well? Because you can be formed for love, or you could be formed for hate from the age of 0 to 5.
Very powerful. Again, I really think that there might be another forum that could become coming up that could address each of those topics, right? Again, combating some of those myths and narratives that we tell of each other that really is not true. At the end of the day, we're all people. And so again, you're right on point. Appreciate your work. Thank you. Past Rabbi Robin.
I remember one incident. It was during the Black Lives Matter protests. And for this one action, it was held in downtown LA. And some of us arrived early to kind of hold the space. And there were funeral cortege from 5 neighborhoods. And Pastor Gary's nodding, you were there. So there were 5 neighborhoods in LA County, the Valley, South LA, East LA, and they all had symbolic hearses with symbolic coffins. And the plan had been that we who were clergy were asked to show up, as my friend Minister Brighty says, in full clergy drag, and we were a sight to see, with Cossacks and taluses, and anyway. And the idea was we were meant to guard the coffins. But there was a change of plans. At a certain point, I think Pastor Q took the mic and said, well, all the white clergy, please go to the back of the truck. So that meant removing ourselves from where the news cameras were, having the black clergy be the face of us. And we got to the back of the truck, we see that there's a whole line of sheriffs. And it turned out that they were threatening to shut everything down, to arrest our friend Felipe from SCIW, who had brought the soundtrack, and to take people away. And so we wielded our white privilege. We sort of lined up, this bunch of obvious clergy and towers and taluses and hijab and all of that, and just started walking them back. And it was sort of amazing. It was like we just gently took one step and one step and one step, and they backed up and backed up and backed up, and we walked them down the street. So it was and it's an example of wielding our white privilege in order to protect our comrades of color who didn't have that privilege.
Thank you so much. Again, a great lesson for each one of us, whether you're white or non-white. Each of us actually do have some kind of privilege based on whatever assumptions it may be. And so again, really, leveraging whatever privilege we have to be of service to others. So again, thank you for that message. Pastor Gary.
Yes, I remember that day too, Rabbi. Yeah. I think that it's the work that I've done now with Clue for a number of years. What we do is stand shoulder to shoulder with the most marginalized of workers, the hotel workers. And prior to that kind of work, I would go to a hotel and see a person cleaning and really wouldn't see them. Really wouldn't see them. They were invisible. I just knew somebody, this is the person that cleaned the room. But now, after being involved with Clue for like over 10 years and actually getting to know people and hearing their stories and their journeys and the fact that some of these particularly women, they take the bus for hours to get to these jobs where they work for a minimal amount of money and they have families and they're trying to do the best that they can to survive. And I've just got to know them. And now when I go to a protest, they know me. They recognize me and they're happy to see me standing there with them, shoulder to shoulder, being in solidarity with them. So powerful, and now when I go to hotels, I want to make sure, I don't want to be in a hotel that's not a union hotel. I want to make sure that I acknowledge and speak to and make sure I leave up some money for them to clean my rooms because they deserve whatever they get. They deserve better than what they get. And so that has made such an impact on my ministry, being a part of the work that Clue has done for years. And so that to me is just opened up a whole new opportunity to really connect with people that I hadn't connected with before.
Thank you. Thank you. Very powerful. Mary.
Yeah, ditto to what Gary said about working with Clue. It's been amazing. I know, talking about past, just showing up in solidarity. I remember the Stop the Hate march in Koreatown in 2021, and just showing up in solidarity with communities that are hurting. But moving forward, and what I've been trying to do, and I think I've done to a certain extent, but really committing is in the Buddhist teachings, there's an aspect, a factor called wise speech, and it's not lying, not being harsh in speech, and so on and so forth. But it also is about saying what needs to be said. It's about ending harm where you see harm being caused. And so it's not necessarily when I'm out as a person that looks the way I look, I can be somewhere and I can hear people talking really harmful ways and about other people. And it's my duty to speak up and say, can we stop? Can we have a conversation? Not online, because I know that doesn't work, but in person, and saying, let's have this conversation. I heard what you were saying and I disagree. And did you know? And maybe bring some education, but to not let those things slide, because that's condoning. That's absolutely condoning, and I don't condone, and I intend not to condone those things when I hear them being
That's
said
courageous
anywhere.
of you. I think that I've encountered many rooms where there is a certain narrative, and I know that everyone in the room is all supporting that narrative. And for me to, I think again, this is an interfaith dialogue in the sense that I do rely on my faith that first, that God wants us to stand up for the voiceless, to stand for truth. And I, in those moments when I take a big gulp, I pray to God for protection and then stand in truth to speak when the narrative, again, is definitely steamrolling in towards one direction. And so, again, a very good point. Thank you so much, Mary, as well. Well, I want to open up for questions, and then we'll see question/comment. Otherwise, I am going to give our panelists one last comment, whether it's what is it about your faith or something that you think is important for what you have found to be truth in terms of stopping hate, stopping fear, stopping violence as well. So I'm going to give a 30-second pause to open up for questions, or else you'll be forever hold your peace, right? So we could take this moment to all meditate and give people the opportunity, and we'll see.
Hyepin, this is Ali Tweeney.
Yes, hi. Thank you for joining
Can
us.
you hear me? Great.
Yes.
Of course, of course. Well, thanks to you for holding this, and thanks to all the panelists for having such an important topic. And the timing could not be better on having this conversation. I don't know if anyone, I'll introduce myself. I'm currently serving as the board of the co-chair of the board of director of clergy and laity United for Economic Justice. And I'm the past vice chairman of the board of directors of the Islamic Center of Southern California. Many of the panelists are wonderful people that I work with across, including yourself. We met once at the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's speech at the Temple Israel of Hollywood.
Yes.
And
many other occasions.
Yeah. So this is a very important, and I think it's a daily conversation that's needed in this time in our lives. And the way to get to a better place on this particular topic is to really have a radical empathy toward each other and understand what happened with the other person in order to achieve the grand goal that we all look for to. So again, I'm grateful to all who made this happen, and I'm grateful to all the work that each and everyone does to make a better tomorrow. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ali. We have one question here from Troy, 2L. How do your respective faith approach forgiveness and reconciliation when dealing with acts of hate? And if you could do that, like again in a minute, because we're coming close, but perhaps, not just like religious and way up there, but perhaps how you may have personally sought to live out that truth, right? I think would be helpful. So with that, who would like to speak first? Pastor Gary. Yeah.
I think for me, forgiveness is more for me than it is for the person I'm forgiving. Because I don't want to hold on to that anger or that maybe somebody has done something to me. And this is not from my religious tradition, but it's out of my 12-step recovery tradition. When I need to forgive, because it helps me to be a better person, and so that's for me, that's the way I would look at forgiveness.
Very powerful. And I think there's a verse about, someone choosing to forgive and set a prisoner free. And that prisoner was themselves. So very, very, very truth. Very much truth. So thank you. Rabbi Robin.
In our tradition, forgiveness is a dialogical process, and it actually begins with repentance, with what we call tshuva. If a person wrongs another person, there, and I've been on that end of it, of having to go to a friend and say, I messed up. I'm asking for forgiveness. I'm not saying I am entitled to it, but here's what I did wrong. Here is exactly what I did wrong. Here's what I'm doing about it, and I'm sorry. And my friend was very gracious and did extend forgiveness. But that's so we're not so much about gratuitous forgiveness. On the other hand, we are forbidden in our Torah to hold a grudge. And I kind of see it as a different thing. In English, it says lo titor in Hebrew, but in English, we have this phrase hold a grudge, which is you're kind of holding the grudge. You're kind of stroking it. You're feeding the grudge. You can just drop it.
Mm.
You can just drop the grudge. And
I like that visual.
Yeah, that's been useful in my life.
Thank you. I love that. Cradling it's almost inconsistent with what you want to do. So very powerful. Professor Najiba.
Sure. Certainly in the Quran, there are many different indications that, for instance, if your enemy goes towards peace, inclined towards peace, that it's better to choose forgiveness over retribution. And very often when I engage in, I'm a restorative justice mediator and also a conflict resolution mediator too. I often ask parties now, though, in the beginning of a conflict, who is human to you in this conflict? Are we in each other's futures? And the last question that I will work with people on is reconciliation justice? And I think that third question of is reconciliation justice is related to whether people can see each other as human or fully human, and whether they believe in a joint future together. And I say that because we have also studies that show, for instance, African American victims of crimes are pushed to ask for forgiveness publicly, quickly. And there are examples of this in the public narrative of the United States. So I just mentioned that I think forgiveness is an important virtue. It's something I spend my life working on in many conflicts that can move people towards justice. But we have to give it the space and the time for people to be ripe for forgiveness, and that the humanity of everyone and the dignity of everyone at the table, that forgiveness is predicated on that. My worry is when we move into a conflict or violent or post-conflict situation and push people publicly to say, you need to forgive, without talking about dignity and humanity of everyone at the table. I think forgiveness is an incredible tool for moving forward. And it needs to be done, I think, in a process that is dignifying and humanizing for everyone. And that's what my tradition would answer this question with.
Powerful, powerful. Who's left? Barry.
So there's a one of the suttas, the discourses of the Buddha. He says that even if you are attacked by a robber on a road and he cuts off your arms and legs, you should not hold hatred in your heart for him. And saying, because hatred is one that we carry in ourselves, is poison to us. And so to recognize that folks who are, or people who are committing these acts against you or whatever it is, that they're, as Najiba says, they're human beings too. And to get to a place of, can I soften my heart? And it's also there's also accountability in Buddhism. It's not just like, oh, I'm sorry, but there's absolute accountability. But as so many others have said, I don't want to have that hardness in my heart, because you don't experience it. I experience that hatred. And it takes time. You have to give, as Najiba said, you have to make space for the emotions. You have to make space for what's there. You have to honor what's showing up with an awareness so that they don't take over and you're not reacting, but you have the wisdom and clarity to hold them with kindness, with compassion, with tenderness, so that you can get to a place. It might take years. It might take years. And so there's no time limit on it. but I think it's a worthy goal to move towards for your benefit.
Beautiful, very powerful. I know that for myself, the LA riots with Sunja Du and Latasha Harlins was one that was really a narrative that I didn't want to touch. And a friend, Naji, suggested that I reach out. And, I didn't want to touch that situation and actually make it worse. Long story short, because I did believe that it was an assignment from God, I decided not to let it go. I really did want to just forget about it, but I really hung on to the Bible verse that God would give me the words to say. And I did obey. It really, I golfed 10 million times, prayed 10 million times. But when I did reach out, Shanice Harlins, who is Latasha Harlins' cousin, was receptive. And that led ultimately to both of us ending up on the front page of the Los Angeles Times. And I just want to say that, again, for each one of us, it takes a lot of courage, I think, and faith to step into a space that is, I believe, could be really risky and dangerous for all of us. But to be able to remove ourselves of that fear, and to lean into, for those who are of faith, to lean into our faith, to seek, because ultimately it's not just healing for that other individual and for our society, but really for us. And I think the sooner we know the truth will set us free, right? As well. And so with that, I just want to say thank you to each of you for joining in on this conversation. And so I would like for each of our speaker to just give us one word, one word that you like to share of this gathering. If you want to cheat, you could add a few more words, but one word that you like to relate to our group here, and then I will toss it back to Cora. I know that we have one more session tomorrow on resources as well. So with that, Mary.
Deep gratitude to all the people in this beautiful mosaic. There's so much to be grateful for.
Thank you. Pastor Gary.
Let us not live in demonstration of hatred, but let us be people marked by love and wisdom. Amen.
Amen. Rabbi Robin.
When asked by a student to teach the entirety of Judaism while standing on one foot, Rabbi Hillel the Elder said, "That which is hateful to yourself, do not do to another person. All the rest is commentary. Now go and learn."
Amen. Amen. Professor Najiba.
I would just end with the word peace, because I think one of the things that Muslims and people of Arab descent right now are facing is an essentializing of our religious or ethnic identity with a propensity for violence. And so just to be really careful that when we meet any community or any person, we understand that they are equally capable of peace and they are equally capable of violence, and that no community or no group of people or no individual should be reduced to one capability or capacity, that we all have different capacities. And I do think right now, I think that that's really important, that we understand I'm a peacemaker because of my religion, because I'm Muslim, not despite it. And I think that's really important that we understand anyone is capable of the capacity for peace building, peacemaking, and that we open the door to that understanding of all peoples.
Amen. Amen. All right. Well, let's thank all our great speakers and panelists. So show a little love there. Okay. Thank you. With that, I will toss it back to Cora. Thank you for your partnership.
Yes, thank you all. This has been so informative, educational, enlightening. I learned so much more than I ever expected. Certainly, I want to thank Reverend Williams for the technical hosting me with all of the other panelists. I really appreciate that. Hyepin, you did an excellent job as a moderator. And it was just, I think everybody should be fired up enough to go out and make a difference. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in. And I hope we'll be reading about your good work to stop pain. Join us tomorrow at the same time for our second part 2, where we will feature professionals from LA, 211 LA, and they'll share all about some of the government resources that you can report hate crimes to. But I hope this won't be the last conversation we'll have. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone smile. I'm going to do a photo op right now. Okay, 1, 2, 3. All right, great. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful day, and we shall see you tomorrow.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
You, thank you.
Thank you.